The morning frost covered the sidewalk like tiny diamonds as Marcus Thompson pulled his worn military jacket tighter around his chest. The December wind cut through the thin fabric like a knife, making him shiver despite his best efforts to stay warm. His breath formed small clouds in the freezing air as he walked slowly down the busy street in downtown Chicago. Marcus had been living on the streets for 3 months now. The proud Marine who once served 2 tours in Afghanistan never imagined he would end up homeless at 34 years old. His dark hair had grown longer than military regulations allowed, and his beard was uneven from using broken mirrors in public restrooms. The olive green jacket he wore showed his last name, Thompson, and various patches that told the story of his service, but most people walking past him saw only another homeless person. The morning rush hour brought waves of people in expensive coats and warm boots. They hurried past Marcus without making eye contact, their phones pressed to their ears or their eyes focused straight ahead. Steam rose from their coffee cups as they talked about meetings and weekend plans. Marcus remembered when he used to be one of them, rushing to work in a clean uniform, feeling important and needed. His stomach made a loud noise that reminded him he had not eaten since yesterday afternoon. A kind woman at the shelter had given him a sandwich, but the shelter had been full last night. Marcus spent the cold hours walking around the city, trying to stay warm and safe. His feet hurt in his old combat boots, and his back ached from sleeping on park benches and in doorways. As he walked past a busy coffee shop, the smell of fresh bread and hot coffee made his mouth water. Through the large windows, he could see families sitting at warm tables, children laughing while their parents read newspapers. The contrast between their comfort and his struggle hit him like a punch to the chest. He had once protected people like this, fought for their freedom and safety in a desert thousands of miles away. Marcus found a spot near the entrance of an office building where he could sit without blocking foot traffic. The security guard inside watched him carefully through the glass doors, but did not come outside. Marcus understood the man was just doing his job, protecting the people who worked in the building. He had done the same thing many times as a soldier. The concrete steps were cold even through his worn jeans, but Marcus was used to discomfort. Military training had taught him to endure difficult conditions, though nothing had prepared him for the challenge of being invisible to society. He watched people walk by, each lost in their own world of problems and responsibilities. A group of teenagers walked past, pointing at Marcus and laughing among themselves. One of them, a boy wearing an expensive jacket and new sneakers, spoke loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "Look at that dirty soldier," the boy said with a smirk. "But he's faking it for money. My dad says most of these guys are just lazy." Marcus felt his face grow warm despite the cold air. He wanted to explain that he had served his country with honor, that he had risked his life to protect the freedom these young people enjoyed. But experience had taught him that defending himself often made situations worse. Instead, he looked down at his hands and tried to ignore their cruel words. The teenagers' laughter echoed off the buildings as they continued down the street. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to remember better times. He thought about his squad in Afghanistan, the brotherhood they shared, and how they looked out for each other no matter what. Those men would never have walked past a fellow veteran in need without offering help. His mind drifted to Sarah, the woman he had planned to marry before his world fell apart. She had tried to stay with him when the nightmares started, when he began drinking to quiet the memories of war. But Marcus pushed her away, convinced that he was broken and dangerous. The last time he saw her, tears were running down her face as she begged him to get help. He was too proud and too scared to admit he needed support. The morning grew colder, and more people filled the sidewalks. Office workers carried steaming cups of coffee that Marcus could smell from 20 feet away. The warmth from those cups seemed like a luxury he could barely remember. His hands were turning red from the cold, and he rubbed them together to keep the blood flowing. A businessman in an expensive suit walked past, talking loudly on his phone about an important deal. As he passed Marcus, he shook his head with disgust and moved to the other side of the sidewalk. The man's reaction was subtle, but Marcus noticed every detail. After months on the streets, he had become an expert at reading people's body language and knowing when he was unwelcome. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It showed him in his military dress uniform on the day he graduated from basic training. His mother and father stood beside him, their faces glowing with pride. His father, also a veteran, had served in Vietnam and understood the weight of military service. Both of his parents had died in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving Marcus alone to face his struggles. The loss of his parents had been the beginning of his downward spiral. Without their emotional support, Marcus found it harder to cope with his warm memories and the civilian world that seemed foreign after years of military structure. The grief mixed with his existing trauma created a perfect storm that destroyed his career, his relationship, and eventually his home. A young mother walked by with her small daughter, both wrapped in warm winter coats. The little girl stared at Marcus with curious eyes, but her mother quickly pulled her away and whispered something about not talking to strangers. Marcus remembered being that little girl's age, looking up to soldiers and veterans as heroes. The irony of his current situation was not lost on him. As the morning progressed, Marcus noticed a pattern in how people reacted to him. Younger people often ignored him completely or made cruel comments. Older adults sometimes showed sympathy in their eyes, but rarely stopped to help. Business people treated him like an obstacle to avoid. The few who did acknowledge him usually just shook their heads with pity before moving on with their day. Despite the constant rejection, Marcus tried to maintain his dignity. He sat up straight, kept his belongings organized, and never approached people aggressively for money. His military training had instilled values of honor and respect that poverty could not erase. He would rather go hungry than lose the last pieces of who he used to be. The wind picked up, sending pieces of paper and dead leaves swirling around the sidewalk. Marcus pulled his thin jacket tighter, but the cold still found ways to reach his skin. His teeth began to chatter, and he pressed his lips together to stop the sound. Showing weakness felt dangerous, even though he was surrounded by people who were simply going about their daily lives. A police officer walked down the street, his heavy boots echoing off the pavement. Marcus tensed, preparing to move if necessary. Some officers understood that homeless veterans were not criminals, while others saw them only as problems to solve. This particular officer nodded respectfully at Marcus as he passed, a small gesture that meant more than the man could know. The kindness of that simple nod reminded Marcus that not everyone had given up on people like him. There were still individuals who saw past his appearance and recognized his humanity. These moments of recognition kept him going during the darkest times, when giving up seemed like the easier choice. Marcus thought about his old unit and wondered what his fellow Marines would think if they could see him now. Some had successfully transitioned to civilian life, finding good jobs and starting families. Others had struggled with similar challenges, though Marcus had lost touch with most of them after leaving the military. The isolation made his problems feel bigger and his future seem hopeless. The morning rush began to slow down as people reached their destinations. The sidewalk became less crowded, giving Marcus more space, but also making him feel more visible and vulnerable. A few people still walked by, but most were tourists or locals running errands rather than commuters heading to work. Marcus stood up slowly, his joints stiff from sitting on the cold concrete. He needed to find somewhere warmer to spend the day, maybe the public library where he could sit quietly without bothering anyone. The library had become his refuge during the coldest days, though he always left before closing time to avoid making the staff uncomfortable. As he gathered his few belongings, Marcus caught his reflection in the office building's glass doors. The man looking back at him seemed like a stranger. His face was thinner than it used to be, with lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, evidence of the weight he had lost since becoming homeless. But behind the worn appearance, Marcus could still see traces of the soldier he used to be. His posture remained straight despite everything, and His eyes still held the alertness that military training had burned into his soul. He was still fighting, even if the battle had changed from protecting others to simply surviving each day. The sound of laughter drew his attention to a group of college students walking past. They were talking excitedly about their classes and weekend plans, their voices full of hope and possibility. Marcus remembered having that same optimism when he was their age, before war showed him how quickly life could change. One of the students, a young man with kind eyes, slowed down as he passed Marcus. For a moment, it seemed like he might stop and offer help or at least a greeting. But his friends called him to hurry up, and the opportunity passed. Marcus was not angry about these missed connections anymore. He understood that most people simply did not know how to help or were afraid of making the wrong choice. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, but its warmth could not reach through the thick clouds that promised more cold weather. Marcus began walking again, his destination unclear, but his need for movement urgent. Staying in one place too long often drew unwanted attention from business owners or security guards. As he walked, Marcus thought about the man he used to be. Sergeant Marcus Thompson had been respected by his peers and trusted with important responsibilities. He had led men into dangerous situations and brought them home safely. The medals in his backpack represented moments when he had been brave, skilled, and necessary. Now he felt like none of those things mattered. Society seemed to have a place for the idea of veterans as heroes, but not for the reality of veterans as complex human beings who sometimes struggled with invisible wounds. The gap between public respect for military service and actual support for struggling veterans felt impossibly wide. Marcus passed a group of people waiting for a bus, their conversations creating a bubble of warmth in the cold morning air. He envied their sense of purpose and belonging, the simple comfort of having somewhere important to go. His own days had lost structure and meaning, measured only by the basic needs of food, warmth, and safety. The bus arrived with a loud hiss of brakes, and people climbed aboard to continue their journeys. Marcus watched through the windows as they found seats and settled in for their rides to work or school. The bus pulled away, taking them toward their futures while leaving Marcus standing alone on the sidewalk with his uncertain present. Despite everything, Marcus refused to give up completely. Each day he survived was a small victory against the forces trying to destroy him. His military training had taught him that missions could change, but the fight itself never ended. Surviving homelessness had become his new mission, and he was determined to complete it with whatever honor he had left. The afternoon brought no relief from the bitter cold that seemed to settle deeper into Marcus's bones with each passing hour. He had walked several blocks from the office building, hoping to find a warmer spot or perhaps a restaurant owner who might spare some leftover food. His stomach had stopped growling hours ago, replaced by a dull ache that he had learned to ignore. Marcus found himself in the shopping district where expensive stores lined both sides of the street. Holiday decorations hung from every window, reminding him that Christmas was only 2 weeks away. Families walked past carrying shopping bags full of gifts, their faces bright with excitement about the upcoming celebration. The contrast between their joy and his isolation felt sharper than the winter wind. He stopped in front of a toy store where a group of children pressed their faces against the glass, pointing at the displays inside. Their breath fogged the window as they talked excitedly about the games and toys they hoped to receive. Marcus remembered Christmas mornings from his own childhood, waking up early to find presents under the tree that his parents had saved money all year to buy. A security guard from one of the nearby stores approached Marcus with a stern expression. The man was older, probably in his 60s, with gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded Marcus of some of the sergeants he had known in the military. "You need to move along," the guard said, though his voice was not unkind. "The store owners don't want you scaring away customers." Marcus nodded and gathered his belongings without argument. He understood that the guard was just doing his job, protecting the businesses that paid his salary. There was no point in explaining his situation or asking for sympathy. Experience had taught him that most people had already made up their minds about homeless veterans before any conversation could begin. As he walked away from the shopping district, Marcus passed a group of teenagers who were volunteering to collect donations for a local charity. They held bright red buckets and wore cheerful smiles as they asked shoppers to spare some change for families in need during the holidays. Marcus found it ironic that charity was happening just a few feet away from where he had been asked to leave for being poor. The volunteers were young and enthusiastic, probably students from a local high school fulfilling community service requirements. One of them, a girl with blonde hair and kind eyes, smiled at Marcus as he passed. For a moment, he wondered if she would recognize him as someone who might need the charity she was collecting for. But her attention quickly returned to approaching shoppers with better clothes and fuller wallets. Marcus continued walking until he found himself in a quieter residential neighborhood. The houses here were modest, but well-maintained, with small yards and Christmas lights beginning to twinkle in the early afternoon darkness. Children played in some of the yards, their laughter carrying on the cold air as parents watched from warm windows. He sat down on a bus stop bench that offered some protection from the wind. The bench was metal and cold, but it was better than standing or sitting on the frozen ground. A schedule posted on the shelter showed that buses came every 30 minutes, giving him a legitimate reason to rest there for a while. An elderly woman approached the bus stop carrying several grocery bags. She was small and moved slowly, her white hair covered by a colorful knitted hat. Marcus immediately stood up to give her the bench, a gesture of respect that his military training had made automatic. "Thank you, young man," she said, settling onto the bench with obvious relief. "These old legs aren't what they used to be." Marcus nodded and stepped back, giving her space while staying close enough to help if she needed assistance. The woman studied his face for a moment, and he expected her to ask him to move further away or express concern about his appearance. Instead, she surprised him with genuine interest. "You look like you've been in the service," she said, noticing the patches on his jacket. "My late husband was in the army during Korea. He always spoke highly of the Marines." The simple acknowledgement of his military service hit Marcus harder than expected. It had been weeks since anyone had recognized him as a veteran rather than just a homeless person. He straightened his shoulders unconsciously, feeling a small spark of the pride he used to carry. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "2 tours in Afghanistan." The woman smiled warmly, and Marcus could see genuine respect in her eyes. "Thank you for your service, son. I know that doesn't solve your problems, but I want you to know that some of us still remember what that uniform means." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. The kindness in her voice reminded him of his own grandmother, who had always believed in him even when he stopped believing in himself. He wanted to tell this stranger about his struggles, about how hard it had been to come home from war to a world that seemed to have moved on without him. But he also did not want to burden her with problems she could not solve. The bus arrived before either of them could say more. The elderly woman struggled to stand with her heavy bags, and Marcus immediately stepped forward to help her. He carried her groceries onto the bus and made sure she found a good seat near the front. The bus driver, a middle-aged black man with patient eyes, waited quietly while Marcus helped the woman get settled. As Marcus turned to leave the bus, the elderly woman caught his hand. "What's your name, son?" she asked softly. "Marcus Thompson, Mom." "I'm Helen," she replied. "Marcus, I know things are hard right now, but please don't give up. The world needs people like you." Marcus squeezed her hand gently before stepping off the bus. As it pulled away, he saw Helen wave at him through the window. The brief encounter had reminded him that he was still human, still worthy of basic dignity and respect. It was a gift he had not expected on such a difficult day. The afternoon was growing colder, and Marcus knew he needed to find shelter soon. The library would be warm, but it also meant sitting still for hours while trying not to fall asleep. Sleeping in public places often drew unwanted attention from security guards or police officers who were just trying to enforce rules they had not written. He walked toward downtown, passing a group of construction workers who were finishing their shift for the day. They climbed into warm trucks with heaters running, laughing, and talking about their plans for the evening. Marcus remembered having a job like that once, honest work that left him tired but satisfied at the end of each day. The construction site reminded him of his brief attempt to find employment after leaving the military. He had applied for dozens of jobs, everything from construction to security work to driving delivery trucks. Some employers were interested until they learned about the gaps in his work history or the nightmares that sometimes made it hard for him to sleep through the night. Mental health remained a taboo subject in many workplaces, especially for jobs that required security clearances or carried significant responsibility. Employers wanted stable, predictable workers, and Marcus's struggles with trauma made him seem like a risk they were not willing to take. The irony was painful. The same experiences that made him seem unemployable had also made him a skilled and disciplined soldier. As evening approached, the street lights began to flicker on, casting long shadows across the sidewalks. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and Marcus could feel his body beginning to shiver more consistently. His thin jacket was no match for December weather in Chicago, especially after the sun disappeared completely. He passed a restaurant where families sat around warm tables, sharing meals and conversation. Through the large windows, he could see children drawing on paper placemats while their parents talked and laughed. The scene reminded him of holiday dinners with his own family, back when his biggest worry was whether the Bears would make the playoffs. A couple walking past the restaurant gave Marcus a wide berth, the woman clutching her purse closer to her body as they hurried past. Their reaction was automatic, born from fears and assumptions rather than any actual threat he posed. Marcus had learned not to take such reactions personally, though they still stung each time they happened. The downtown area was busier in the evening, with people heading home from work or going out for dinner and entertainment. Marcus found a doorway near a closed shop where he could stand without blocking foot traffic. The building provided some protection from the wind, though the concrete steps were cold even through his worn boots. A group of young professionals walked past, their conversation animated and full of energy. They were dressed in expensive clothes and talked about meeting friends at a bar downtown. One of them, a man in his 30s wearing a wool coat, glanced at Marcus as they passed. For a moment, their eyes met, and Marcus saw something like recognition in the man's face. The professional stopped walking and turned back toward Marcus while his friends continued down the street. He approached slowly, his expression uncertain but not unkind. Marcus prepared himself for another lecture about getting a job or cleaning up his appearance, the kind of simple advice that people often offered when they did not understand the complexity of a situation. "Excuse me," the man said quietly. "Were you in the military?" Marcus nodded, unsure where the conversation was heading. "I was Navy," the man continued. "4 years on a destroyer. I just wanted to say thank you for your service, and I'm sorry things are rough right now." The man reached into his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. He handed it to Marcus without making a big show of his generosity, treating the gesture like a simple transaction between equals rather than charity from superior to inferior. "Get something warm to eat," he said simply before rejoining his friends. Marcus stared at the money in his hand, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. $20 was enough for a hot meal and maybe a cup of coffee that he could nurse for an hour in a warm restaurant. More importantly, the man had treated him with dignity, recognizing him as a fellow veteran rather than just another homeless person. The encounter reminded Marcus that good people still existed in the world, individuals who understood that circumstances could change quickly and that today's success did not guarantee tomorrow's security. The man in the wool coat had probably gone home to a warm apartment and a comfortable life, but he had not forgotten where he came from or what military service really meant. Marcus walked several blocks until he found a small diner that looked welcoming and affordable. Through the windows, he could see a few customers sitting at the counter and booths, the kind of regular people who appreciated good food without pretending to be sophisticated. The smell of coffee and burgers made his mouth water as he approached the entrance. Before going inside, Marcus stopped to check his appearance in the diner's window. His hair was messy from the wind, and his face showed the strain of spending days outdoors in harsh weather. But his jacket was clean, and he had maintained enough personal hygiene to be acceptable in public. Dignity was one of the few things he could still control. The diner was warm and bright inside, with red vinyl booths and a long counter where several people sat reading newspapers or talking quietly. A waitress with graying hair and kind eyes looked up as Marcus entered. Her expression showed neither judgment nor excessive sympathy, just the professional neutrality of someone who had served all kinds of customers. Marcus chose a booth in the back corner where he would be less visible to other customers but could still see the entire restaurant. Military habits died hard, and he still preferred to sit with his back to a wall and clear sight lines to all entrances. The waitress brought him a menu and a glass of water without being asked. The menu offered simple food at reasonable prices, the kind of comfort meals that could warm a person from the inside out. Marcus ordered a bowl of beef stew with bread and a cup of coffee, spending most of his $20 but knowing the hot food would help him survive another cold night on the streets. As he waited for his meal, Marcus watched the other customers and listened to their quiet conversations. An older man at the counter was talking to the waitress about his grandchildren's Christmas visit. A young couple in a nearby booth was planning their weekend together, their voices full of affection and shared dreams. These ordinary moments of human connection reminded Marcus of everything he had lost and everything he was fighting to regain. The simple pleasure of sitting in a warm place with hot food on the way felt like a luxury he had almost forgotten existed. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to hope that tomorrow might be better than today. The beef stew arrived steaming hot, with thick chunks of meat and vegetables floating in a rich brown broth that smelled like comfort itself. Marcus ate slowly, savoring each spoonful and letting the warmth spread through his cold body. The bread was fresh and soft, perfect for soaking up the last drops of broth. He could not remember when food had tasted so good or meant so much. The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly what he needed to help him stay alert for the long night ahead. Marcus wrapped his hands around the warm cup. Feeling sensation returned to his fingers for the first time since morning. The simple pleasure of warmth reminded him of small comforts he had taken for granted when he had a home. As he ate, Marcus became aware of conversations happening around him. At a nearby booth, a father was helping his young son with homework, patiently explaining multiplication tables while the boy struggled to understand. The scene reminded Marcus of his own father, a Vietnam veteran who had always made time to help with schoolwork despite his own difficult memories of war. His father had never talked much about Vietnam, but Marcus had learned to recognize the signs of old trauma in the way his dad sometimes stared off into the distance or woke up suddenly from nightmares. After returning from Afghanistan, Marcus finally understood what his father had carried for so many years. The understanding had brought them closer together in the months before his parents' death. The waitress refilled his coffee without being asked, adding a small smile that seemed genuine rather than forced. Marcus thanked her quietly, appreciating the simple kindness of someone doing their job well. In the military, he had learned to value competence and reliability above flashy gestures, and this woman clearly understood how to make customers feel welcome. A news report played softly on the television mounted in the corner, covering stories about economic uncertainty and rising housing costs. The reporter mentioned that veterans were experiencing homelessness at higher rates than the general population, a statistic that made Marcus both angry and sad. He was not alone in his struggle, but that knowledge provided little comfort when facing another night in the cold. The diner began to empty as the evening progressed, leaving Marcus as one of only a few remaining customers. He nursed his second cup of coffee as long as possible, knowing that leaving meant returning to the harsh reality of life on the streets. The warmth and normalcy of the diner had provided a temporary escape from his problems, but those problems would be waiting for him outside. A police officer entered the diner and took a seat at the counter, ordering coffee and a piece of pie. Marcus tensed slightly, old habits making him cautious around law enforcement, even when he had done nothing wrong. The officer was young, probably in his 20s, with the earnest expression of someone new to the job. The waitress brought the officer his order, and they chatted briefly about the cold weather and the busy holiday season. Their interaction was friendly and professional, the kind of relationship that developed between cops and business owners who saw each other regularly. Marcus relaxed as he realized the officer was simply taking a break rather than responding to any kind of problem. As the officer finished his pie, he noticed Marcus sitting alone in the back booth. Their eyes met briefly, and Marcus prepared for questions about his presence in the diner or his plans for the evening. Instead, the young officer simply nodded respectfully, the kind of greeting that acknowledged shared humanity without judgment or suspicion. The small gesture meant more than the officer could know. Marcus had experienced too many interactions with police who saw him only as a potential problem to solve or move along. This young man's respectful nod suggested that not all officers had forgotten that homeless people were still citizens deserving of basic dignity. When the officer left, Marcus knew his time in the diner was coming to an end. The staff would need to clean and close for the night, and he could not justify occupying a booth indefinitely. He left a small tip from his remaining money, knowing that the waitress probably earned most of her income from gratuities rather than hourly wages. The cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped outside, making him shiver immediately after the warmth of the diner. The temperature had dropped further while he ate, and his breath formed thick clouds in the frigid air. The streets were less crowded now, with most people safely inside warm homes or businesses. Marcus began the familiar routine of finding a place to spend the night. The shelter would be full by now, and many of the safer doorways and alcoves would already be occupied by other homeless individuals. He had learned through experience which areas to avoid and which offered the best combination of safety and protection from the weather. As he walked through the downtown area, Marcus passed a church where a sign advertised evening services. Warm light spilled from the windows, and he could hear voices singing hymns inside. The sound reminded him of attending church with his grandmother as a child, back when faith seemed like a simple answer to life's questions. The church doors were unlocked, and Marcus paused to consider whether he might be welcome inside. Some churches opened their doors to anyone seeking shelter from the cold, while others preferred to keep their charitable activities more structured and controlled. He decided not to test their hospitality, unwilling to risk embarrassment or rejection on such a difficult night. A couple emerged from the church, bundled in warm coats and scarves, their faces glowing with the contentment that came from community and shared beliefs. They walked past Marcus without seeming to notice him, lost in conversation about the sermon and their plans for the rest of the week. Marcus envied their sense of belonging and purpose, the comfort of knowing they had a place in the world. He continued walking until he found a construction site surrounded by plywood barriers. The barriers blocked most of the wind, and construction equipment provided some additional shelter from view. Marcus had learned to be careful around such sites, knowing that security guards or police officers sometimes patrolled them during night hours. The ground was frozen and uncomfortable, but Marcus had slept in worse conditions during his military deployments. He arranged his belongings to provide some insulation and settled in for what he knew would be a long, cold night. His jacket provided minimal warmth, and he wrapped his arms around himself to conserve body heat. Sleep came in short intervals, interrupted by cold, discomfort, and the sounds of the city around him. Car horns honked in the distance, sirens wailed as emergency vehicles responded to calls, and occasional voices carried on the night air. Marcus had developed the ability to sleep lightly, staying alert to potential dangers while getting just enough rest to function. Around midnight, it began to snow. The flakes started small and gentle, but soon grew larger and more persistent. Marcus watched them accumulate on the ground around him, beautiful and deadly at the same time. Snow would make him more visible to anyone looking for trespassers, but it also provided a thin layer of insulation if he could avoid getting wet. The temperature continued to drop as the night progressed, reaching levels that made Marcus worry about frostbite and hypothermia. He had learned about both conditions during military training, understanding that they could kill as effectively as any enemy bullet. His fingers and toes began to lose feeling despite his efforts to keep blood circulating. Near dawn, Marcus heard footsteps approaching the construction site. He gathered his belongings quickly, preparing to move if necessary. A security guard appeared around the plywood barrier, flashlight in hand and radio clipped to his belt. The man was older and heavy-set, with the tired expression of someone working a night shift. "You can't stay here," the guard said, though his voice lacked hostility. "Company policy. I have to ask you to move along." Marcus nodded and stood slowly, his joints stiff from the cold and uncomfortable sleeping position. The guard waited patiently while he gathered his things, not rushing him unnecessarily or treating him like a criminal. Some security guards took pleasure in their authority over homeless people, but this man seemed to understand that he was dealing with human beings in difficult circumstances. "There's a warming center about 6 blocks north," the guard offered as Marcus prepared to leave. "They open at 6 in the morning for coffee and breakfast." The unexpected helpfulness surprised Marcus. He thanked the guard and headed in the direction he had indicated, hoping to find a warming center before hypothermia became a serious threat. The snow continued to fall, making the sidewalks slippery and reducing visibility in the early morning darkness. Marcus walked through neighborhoods that were just beginning to wake up. Lights appeared in windows as people prepared for work or school, and he could smell coffee and bacon cooking in warm kitchens. Newspaper delivery trucks made their rounds, and early commuters scraped ice off their car windshields while engines warmed up. The warming center was located in the basement of an old community center, identified only by a small sign and an arrow pointing downstairs. Marcus followed several other people through the entrance, all of them seeking refuge from the brutal cold. The basement was warm and brightly lit, with folding tables and chairs set up cafeteria style. Volunteers served coffee and simple breakfast items from small kitchen area. They were mostly older adults, probably retirees who had decided to spend their free time helping others. Their faces showed compassion rather than pity, treating their guests with dignity despite the circumstances that brought them together. Marcus accepted a cup of coffee and a Danish pastry, finding a seat at a table near the back of the room. The warmth felt incredible after spending the night outdoors, and he could feel his body beginning to relax as his core temperature slowly returned to normal. Around him, other homeless individuals sat quietly, many of them probably veterans like himself. An older man at his table introduced himself as Robert, a Vietnam veteran who had been living on the streets for several years. Robert's face was weathered and his clothes were worn, but his eyes remained alert and intelligent. He offered practical advice about surviving winter nights and warned Marcus about areas of the city where homeless people faced harassment or violence. "The key is staying invisible," Robert explained quietly. "Most people don't want to see us anyway, so we give them what they want. Keep moving, stay clean when you can, and don't cause trouble for anybody." Marcus listened carefully, understanding that he was receiving wisdom earned through harsh experience. Robert had clearly learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of homelessness, finding ways to survive while maintaining his dignity and sanity. The older veteran's presence reminded Marcus that he was not the first soldier to face these challenges. As the morning progressed, more people arrived seeking warmth and basic nutrition. The volunteers worked efficiently to serve everyone, never making their guests feel rushed or unwelcome. Marcus watched their interactions with admiration, recognizing the kind of selfless service that military training had taught him to value. A young volunteer, probably a college student, approached Marcus with a second cup of coffee. She had brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and wore a university sweatshirt under her volunteer apron. Her smile was genuine and warm, without the nervous uncertainty that many people showed when interacting with homeless individuals. "Would you like more coffee?" she asked simply. Marcus accepted gratefully, appreciating both the caffeine and the normal human interaction. The student did not try to start a conversation about his situation or offer advice about getting his life together. She simply treated him like any other person who might want another cup of coffee, a small kindness that felt revolutionary after days of being invisible. The warming center would close at 8 o'clock, sending everyone back into the cold morning air. Marcus knew he would need to find ways to stay warm until the library opened or until he could find another temporary refuge. The cycle of survival would begin again, 1 hour and 1 day at a time. The clock on the warming center wall showed 7:30 when Marcus began gathering his belongings for another day on the streets. The coffee and pastry had helped restore some of his energy, but he could already feel the cold seeping through the building's walls as volunteers prepared to close the facility. Other homeless individuals were making similar preparations, their faces showing the resignation of people who understood that comfort was always temporary. Robert, the Vietnam veteran, shook Marcus's hand before heading toward the exit. "Stay strong, Marine," he said quietly. "Remember what we learned in the service about adapting and overcoming. This is just another mission." Marcus nodded, grateful for the reminder that his military training had value even in civilian circumstances that seemed to have no connection to his service. Survival skills, mental toughness, and the ability to function under stress were all transferable to the challenges of homelessness, even if society did not always recognize that connection. The temperature outside had risen slightly with the morning sun, but snow still covered the sidewalks and made walking treacherous. Marcus stepped carefully, knowing that a fall could result in injury that would make his situation even more difficult. He had no health insurance and could not afford medical care, making prevention his only option. As he walked through the downtown area, Marcus noticed that the morning rush hour was beginning. People emerged from warm cars and buildings, hurrying toward offices and shops with their heads down against the cold. Steam rose from their coffee cups, and their breath formed clouds in the frigid air, but their expressions showed determination rather than the desperate survival instinct that drove Marcus's own movements. He passed a group of construction workers starting their day at a building site, their voices loud and cheerful despite the harsh weather. They wore insulated coveralls and heavy boots equipped with the proper gear to work safely in winter conditions. Marcus remembered having clothes like that once, back when he had a job that required protection from the elements. The library would not open for another hour, leaving Marcus with time to fill and no place to go. He walked slowly through the streets, conserving energy while trying to stay warm through movement. His stomach was already beginning to remind him that one pastry would not sustain him through an entire day, but he had no money left from the $20 the Navy veteran had given him. A small park appeared ahead, its trees bare of leaves and its benches covered with snow. Despite the cold, Marcus decided to sit for a few minutes and rest his feet. The bench was wet and uncomfortable, but it provided a place to stop walking and observe the city waking up around him. He brushed snow off a section of the bench and sat down carefully. From his position in the park, Marcus could see into the windows of nearby apartment buildings. People moved around inside their warm homes, getting dressed for work or preparing breakfast for their families. Children appeared at some windows, their faces pressed against the glass as they watched the snow continue to fall. The scenes reminded Marcus of everything normal life contained that he had lost. A jogger passed by on the sidewalk, her breath forming rhythmic puffs of vapor as she maintained her pace despite the cold weather. She wore expensive running gear designed for winter conditions, and her focused expression suggested she was training for a specific goal rather than just exercising for fitness. Marcus admired her dedication and remembered when he had possessed similar discipline and purpose. The sound of church bells echoed across the neighborhood, calling people to morning services. Marcus counted the bells automatically, a habit from his military days when time had structure and meaning. 8 o'clock meant the library would open soon, providing him with several hours of warmth and relative safety. As he prepared to leave the park, Marcus noticed a woman walking toward him with a small dog on a leash. The dog was wearing a tiny winter coat and boots to protect its paws from the salt and snow, obviously well cared for and loved. The woman was in her 30s, dressed in professional clothes under a long wool coat, probably heading to work at one of the nearby office buildings. The dog, a small terrier with bright eyes and an eager expression, pulled toward Marcus with friendly curiosity. Dogs often reacted to him more positively than their owners did, perhaps sensing something in his demeanor that people missed. This particular dog wagged its tail and strained against the leash, wanting to investigate the interesting new person. "Sorry," the woman said, pulling gently on the leash. "He's very social. He wants to say hello to everyone." Marcus smiled slightly and extended his hand for the dog to sniff, a gesture that came naturally despite everything he had been through. The dog's enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment, Marcus forgot about his problems and simply enjoyed the uncomplicated affection of an animal that judged him only on his immediate behavior. "What's his name?" Marcus asked quietly. "Charlie," the woman replied, and Marcus could hear surprise in her voice. She had probably expected him to ignore her or respond aggressively, based on assumptions about homeless people that media and social prejudices had created. Instead, she found herself having a normal conversation about her pet. "He's a good dog," Marcus said, scratching behind Charlie's ears. "Reminds me of a dog my unit adopted in Afghanistan. We called him Ranger." The mention of military service changed something in the woman's expression. She looked at Marcus more carefully, perhaps noticing details about his appearance and bearing that she had missed during her initial assessment. The patches on his jacket became more than just decorations, and his posture suggested discipline rather than defeat. "You were deployed overseas?" she asked, her voice softer now. Marcus nodded. "2 tours. Ranger used to sleep outside our barracks, and wake us up if anything seemed wrong. Probably saved our lives more than once." The woman's entire demeanor shifted as she processed this information. Charlie continued to wag his tail and seek attention from Marcus, providing a bridge between two people who might otherwise have passed each other without meaningful contact. The dog's innocent friendliness had created an opportunity for human connection that social barriers usually prevented. "My brother is in the army," the woman said after a moment. "He's stationed in Germany right now. He always talks about the dogs they meet during deployments." Marcus could see genuine interest replacing the caution that had characterized her initial approach. She was beginning to see him as an individual with experiences and stories rather than just another homeless person to avoid. The transformation reminded Marcus of how quickly perceptions could change when people allowed themselves to look beyond surface appearances. They talked for several more minutes about military service, deployed pets, and the challenges of transitioning back to civilian life. The woman, who introduced herself as Jessica, listened attentively as Marcus shared carefully chosen stories about his time in Afghanistan. He avoided the darker aspects of his experience, focusing instead on moments of humor and camaraderie that civilians could understand and appreciate. Charlie grew restless as the conversation continued, reminding Jessica that she needed to get to work. She glanced at her watch with obvious reluctance, clearly torn between her schedule and her interest in continuing their discussion. Marcus recognized her dilemma and made it easier by acknowledging that she probably had responsibilities to attend to. "Thank you for letting me meet Charlie," Marcus said. "He reminds me of better times." Jessica hesitated, clearly wanting to do something helpful, but unsure what would be appropriate or effective. Marcus had seen this expression many times, the look of good people who recognized a problem, but did not know how to solve it. Most simply walked away rather than risk making an awkward mistake, but Jessica seemed determined to find some way to help. "Are you warm enough?" she asked finally. "I mean, do you have a place to stay tonight?" The question was direct, but asked with genuine concern rather than nosiness or judgment. Marcus appreciated her honesty and decided to respond with equal directness. "I'll be okay," he said. "I know how to take care of myself." Jessica reached into her purse and pulled out a business card along with a $20 bill. "This is where I work," she said, handing him both items. "If you ever need someone to talk to about transitioning back to civilian life, or if you need help finding resources, please call me." I volunteer with a veterans organization on weekends. Marcus accepted the card and money with dignity, understanding that Jessica was offering more than just financial assistance. She was providing him with a connection to someone who might understand his challenges and know about resources that could help him rebuild his life. The gesture felt different from simple charity because it recognized his potential rather than just his immediate needs. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means more than you know." Jessica smiled and tugged gently on Charlie's leash, preparing to continue their walk to her office. "Take care of yourself, and please don't hesitate to call if you need help." Marcus watched them walk away, Jessica's professional heels clicking on the sidewalk, while Charlie trotted beside her with obvious happiness. The encounter had reminded him that good people still exist in the world, individuals who were willing to see past circumstances to the person underneath. It had also shown him that his military service still meant something to people who understood its significance. He looked at Jessica's business card and saw that she worked for a law firm downtown. The card listed her as a paralegal, suggesting that she understood how systems worked and might genuinely be able to help him navigate bureaucracies that had frustrated his previous attempts to get assistance. Her offer felt sincere rather than perfunctory, based on a real conversation rather than guilty impulse. The library was probably open by now, and Marcus began walking in that direction. The encounter with Jessica and Charlie had improved his mood significantly, reminding him that he was still capable of normal human interactions when given the opportunity. The $20 would buy him another hot meal, and the business card represented something more valuable, a potential path forward. As he walked, Marcus thought about the contrast between Jessica's reaction and the responses he usually received from passersby. She had taken time to see him as an individual, asked questions about his experiences, and treated him with the respect that military service traditionally earned. Her brother's army service had probably helped her understand that soldiers were real people who sometimes faced serious challenges after their service ended. The snow was beginning to melt slightly as the sun climbed higher, creating slush on the sidewalks that soaked through Marcus's worn boots. His feet were cold and wet, but his spirits were higher than they had been in weeks. Sometimes hope came from unexpected sources, often when it was most needed and least expected. Marcus passed the same office building where he had spent the previous morning, but now it felt different. The security guard nodded to him through the glass doors, a gesture that seemed friendlier than mere acknowledgement. Perhaps word had spread about his respectful behavior, or maybe the guard simply recognized him as a regular presence in the neighborhood rather than a threat. The library appeared ahead, its warm lights and open doors promising several hours of comfort and safety. Marcus quickened his pace slightly, eager to get inside and continue planning his next steps. Jessica's business card felt like a lifeline in his jacket pocket, a tangible reminder that his situation did not have to be permanent. Inside the library, Marcus found his usual spot near the back of the building where he could read newspapers and magazines without disturbing other patrons. The warmth felt incredible after spending the night outdoors, and he settled into a comfortable chair with a sense of relief that he was beginning to take for granted. As he read the morning paper, Marcus's mind kept returning to his conversation with Jessica. Her genuine interest in his military service had reminded him that his experiences had value beyond survival skills. He possessed knowledge, training, and perspectives that could benefit others if he could find the right opportunity to share them. For the first time in months, Marcus began to think seriously about his future rather than just his immediate survival. Jessica's offer to help him find resources suggested that options existed that he had not yet explored. Her business card represented more than just money. It symbolized the possibility that someone believed he was worth helping. The morning passed quietly as Marcus read and rested, occasionally looking up to watch other library patrons pursue their own interests. Students worked on assignments, elderly people read newspapers, and parents supervised children in the children's section. The normal rhythm of library life reminded Marcus of communities and purposes that extended beyond the immediate challenges of homelessness. Around noon, Marcus decided to use some of his money for lunch. He had spotted a small cafe near the library that served simple meals at reasonable prices. As he prepared to leave the warm building, Marcus touched Jessica's business card in his pocket one more time, drawing strength from the knowledge that he was not completely alone in the world. The cafe near the library was small and unpretentious, with checkered tablecloths and the kind of simple menu that promised honest food at fair prices. Marcus entered quietly, choosing a table near the window where he could watch the street while staying warm. The lunch crowd was beginning to arrive, mostly office workers and shoppers taking a break from their daily routines. A waitress in her 40s approached his table with a friendly smile and the efficient manner of someone experienced in the restaurant business. She poured him coffee without being asked and left a menu, treating him no differently than any other customer. Marcus appreciated her professionalism and ordered a bowl of soup with a grilled cheese sandwich, comfort food that would provide warmth and sustenance. As he waited for his meal, Marcus pulled out Jessica's business card and studied it carefully. The law firm's address was only a few blocks away, and he found himself wondering if he should call her number or simply show up at her office. Either approach felt intimidating after months of isolation, but Jessica had seemed genuinely interested in helping him find resources for veterans. His soup arrived hot and steaming, with thick vegetables and tender beef that reminded him of meals his mother used to make during cold winters. The grilled cheese sandwich was perfectly golden, with melted cheese stretching as he pulled the halves apart. Simple food had never tasted so good or meant so much to his sense of well-being. While eating, Marcus observed the other customers and listened to fragments of their conversations. A businessman at a nearby table was complaining about his workload while simultaneously checking his phone for messages. Two women were discussing their children's school activities with the kind of casual concern that suggested stable family lives. An elderly couple shared a piece of pie and talked quietly about their grandchildren's upcoming visit. These ordinary moments of human connection reminded Marcus of everything he had lost and everything he hoped to regain. The simple pleasure of sitting in a warm restaurant with hot food represented normalcy and dignity that homelessness had stripped away. For 40 minutes, he could pretend to be just another customer taking a lunch break from his regular responsibilities. The businessman's phone conversation caught Marcus's attention when he heard mentions of military contracts and defense spending. The man was clearly frustrated with bureaucratic delays and budget constraints that were affecting his company's projects. Marcus found himself thinking about his own military experience and wondering if his knowledge of military procedures and equipment might have value in the civilian world. As he finished his meal, Marcus made a decision that surprised him with its suddenness and clarity. He would call Jessica that afternoon and ask for her help in finding resources for veterans. The worst thing that could happen was that she would be too busy to assist him, but even that outcome would leave him no worse off than he was now. The waitress brought his check with another smile, and Marcus left a small tip from his remaining money. The gesture felt important, a reminder that he was still capable of participating in normal social customs despite his current circumstances. Treating others with respect and generosity, even in small ways, helped maintain his sense of dignity and self-worth. Outside the cafe, Marcus found a payphone near the library entrance. He had avoided using his broken cell phone for weeks, but the payphone offered a way to contact Jessica without revealing his lack of permanent address or reliable communication. His hands shook slightly as he dialed her number, whether from cold or nervousness he could not tell. Johnson, Miller, and Associates, a receptionist's voice answered professionally. "May I speak with Jessica, please?" Marcus asked. "She gave me her card this morning." "Jessica Morrison? One moment, please." The hold music played for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute before Jessica's voice came on the line. She sounded busy, but not impatient, the tone of someone who was used to handling multiple responsibilities simultaneously. "This is Jessica. How can I help you?" "This is Marcus Thompson," he said. "We met this morning when I was playing with your dog, Charlie. You gave me your card and said to call if I needed help finding resources for veterans." Jessica's voice immediately became warmer and more personal. Marcus, I'm so glad you called. I've been thinking about our conversation all morning. Are you somewhere warm right now? The question showed genuine concern rather than idle curiosity, and Marcus found himself relaxing slightly. Yes, I'm near the library downtown. I had lunch, and I'm staying warm. Good. Listen, I have about 30 minutes before my next meeting. Would you be willing to come to my office? I'd like to introduce you to someone who might be able to help you find housing and other resources. It's only a few blocks from where you are. Marcus felt his heart rate increase with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Jessica was offering real help, not just sympathy or small amounts of money. The prospect of meeting someone who might help him find housing felt both exciting and terrifying after months of survival on the streets. I would appreciate that very much, he said carefully. Jessica gave him directions to her office building and assured him that the receptionist would be expecting him. As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized that his hands had stopped shaking. For the first time in months, he was moving towards something positive rather than simply trying to avoid something negative. The law firm occupied several floors of a modern office building downtown, with impressive windows and professional signage that suggested success and stability. Marcus paused outside the entrance to check his appearance in the glass doors, smoothing his hair and making sure his jacket was zipped properly. First impressions mattered, especially when asking for help from people who had the power to change his situation. The lobby was warm and elegant, with comfortable seating and artwork that conveyed prosperity and respectability. A security guard at the front desk checked Marcus's identification and called upstairs to confirm his appointment with Jessica. The guard was professional but thorough, clearly trained to balance security concerns with customer service. Marcus took the elevator to the 7th floor, where the law firm's reception area continued the theme of understated success. The receptionist, a woman in her 20s with a friendly smile, directed him to a conference room where Jessica was waiting with another woman who appeared to be in her 50s. Marcus, thank you for coming, Jessica said, standing to greet him. I'd like you to meet Susan Chun. She runs a nonprofit organization that helps veterans transition back to civilian life, including housing assistance and job placement services. Susan Chun had graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a simple business suit and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent years helping people solve complex problems. Her handshake was firm, and her smile seemed genuine, suggesting that she was used to working with people in difficult circumstances. Jessica told me about your military service, Susan said as they sat down around the conference table. I've been working with veterans for over 15 years, and I understand how challenging the transition can be, especially when unexpected problems arise. Marcus found himself telling Susan about his military experience, the deaths of his parents, and the series of setbacks that had led to his current situation. She listened carefully without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed she understood both military culture and the civilian systems that veterans needed to navigate. The first thing we need to do is get you into transitional housing, Susan explained. I have connections with several programs specifically designed for veterans, including some that don't have waiting lists if you qualify. We can also help you apply for VA benefits that you might not have known were available. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Susan explaining various resources and programs while Jessica took notes and asked questions. Marcus learned about job training programs, mental health services, and financial assistance that he had never heard of during his previous attempts to find help. The complexity of available resources was both encouraging and overwhelming. The key is coordinating all these services, Susan continued. Too many veterans fall through the cracks because they don't know what's available or how to access it. That's where my organization comes in. We help people navigate the system and make sure they get connected to appropriate resources. As the meeting progressed, Marcus began to feel something he had not experienced in months: genuine hope for his future. Susan's knowledge and connection suggested that his situation was not permanent, that there were specific steps he could take to rebuild his life. Jessica's willingness to facilitate the meeting showed that good people still cared about helping others succeed. "I can have you in transitional housing by tomorrow night," Susan said, pulling out her phone to make some calls. "The program I have in mind is specifically for veterans, and they understand the challenges you've been facing. You'll have your own room, shared kitchen facilities, and access to case management services." Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes, but fought them back, not wanting to appear weak or overly emotional. The prospect of sleeping in a real bed with a roof over his head felt almost too good to believe after months of uncertainty and discomfort. Susan noticed his reaction and smiled with understanding. "It's normal to feel overwhelmed," she said gently. "This is a big change, and it's okay to have mixed emotions about it. The important thing is that you're ready to accept help and work toward rebuilding your life." The meeting ended with specific plans and contact information. Susan would pick Marcus up at the library the next morning and help him move into transitional housing. Jessica provided him with her personal phone number in case he needed additional support or encountered unexpected problems. Both women treated him with respect and dignity, seeing potential rather than just problems. As Marcus left the office building, he felt like a different person than the one who had entered an hour earlier. The hopelessness that had characterized his recent months was beginning to fade, replaced by concrete plans and genuine opportunities. He still faced significant challenges, but now he had allies and resources to help him overcome them. The afternoon was still cold, but Marcus no longer felt the bitter hopelessness that had made the weather seem so harsh. He walked back toward the library with purpose rather than just killing time, planning to use the computers to research some of the programs Susan had mentioned. For the first time in months, his future extended beyond simply surviving until tomorrow. That evening, Marcus ate dinner at the same diner where he had found warmth the night before. The waitress remembered him and smiled when he sat down at the counter, treating him like a regular customer rather than a stranger. He ordered the same beef stew and felt grateful not just for the food, but for the normal human interaction that reminded him he was still part of society. As he prepared to spend his last night on the streets, Marcus thought about the series of small kindnesses that had led to this breakthrough. The Navy veteran who had given him $20, Jessica's willingness to see past his circumstances, and Susan's professional dedication to helping veterans had combined to create an opportunity for real change. The construction site where he had slept the previous night seemed different now, a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent condition. Marcus arranged his belongings and settled in for the night, knowing that tomorrow would bring the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The cold was still brutal, but it no longer felt hopeless. In the morning, Susan arrived at the library exactly when she had promised, driving a modest sedan with a warm smile and a travel mug of coffee. She helped Marcus gather his few possessions and drove him to a clean, well-maintained facility that specialized in helping veterans get back on their feet. The transitional housing program provided Marcus with a small but private room, regular meals, and access to counselors who understood military culture and veteran-specific challenges. Within a week, he was enrolled in job training programs and receiving mental health support that addressed his war trauma and adjustment difficulties. 3 months later, Marcus had found steady employment as a security supervisor for a company that valued his military experience and leadership skills. He had moved into his own apartment and was slowly rebuilding relationships with people who had cared about him before his problems began. The transformation was not easy or immediate, but it was real and sustainable. Jessica and Susan remained important parts of his support network, representing the kind of people who understood that circumstances could change quickly and that everyone deserved a chance to rebuild their life. Marcus learned to accept help gracefully while also finding ways to help other veterans who were facing similar challenges. A year later, Marcus volunteered with Susan's organization, using his own experience to help other homeless veterans understand that their situation was not permanent. He had learned that sometimes hope came from unexpected sources, often delivered by people who took time to see individuals rather than just problems. The military patches on his jacket still told the story of his service, but now they represented strength and resilience rather than loss and failure. Marcus had discovered that his military training remained valuable in civilian life, providing him with skills and perspectives that could help both himself and others overcome significant challenges. The simple kindness of strangers, a woman walking her dog who took time to really listen, professionals who saw potential rather than just problems, had reminded Marcus that good people still existed in the world. Their willingness to help had given him the opportunity to become one of those good people himself, creating a cycle of support that extended far beyond his own recovery.